Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming here today to engage in a discussion about these important issues. Thank you to the Warsaw School of Economics, and thank you to Demos Europa for helping to make possible this visit. Some of you may have come here hoping to hear the Foreign Secretary. He is my brother, so I'm sorry if you are disappointed, David Miliband. But it is a pleasure for me to be here in Warsaw today. And the relationship between Britain and Poland is a very important relationship in my view. Our historic alliances, including during the Second World War. We now have a significant Polish presence in the UK, as you know, including in the constituency I represent in the north of England. And of course, both working together in the European Union, and this year marks 20 years since Britain watched in admiration as the Solidarity movement grew up out of the Gdansk shipyard and has of course changed Poland in such profound ways. I also have personal reasons for being pleased to be here. I was last here a long time ago, a decade ago, with my mother. She was born in this country. My father's parents were born here too, and for my mother, she had obviously a traumatic family history, but she was extremely grateful for the amazing bravery of a Polish family who took in her and her sister and her mother as Jews during the Second World War. And funnily enough, I was in Russia yesterday, and a new link to Poland emerged because I was on a radio station and trying to answer some difficult questions about energy and climate change, and a lady rang up to say that she was my cousin who was living in Moscow, and indeed I visited her last night, and she is the daughter of one of 15 children that were born in Warsaw. Her father emigrated to Russia at the beginning of the last century, at the beginning of the 20th century, and his name was David Miliband. So it was a very interesting thing for my family to discover this relationship. I want to talk for about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll have time for half an hour of questions and comments, which I very much look forward to. My theme is a very urgent theme in the context of the United Kingdom, and indeed I would argue the world, which is the crucial Copenhagen Climate Change Summit, which takes place in December of this year. The world has said that it will come together in Denmark, in Copenhagen, to try and agree a new treaty on the environment and climate change, a successor treaty to the Kyoto Treaty, which was negotiated in 1997. And I want to try and argue and convey the stakes, the importance of this treaty to you today, and why I think this is a very important major issue for the world, and indeed for Poland and the United Kingdom. And my argument is basically that the world is going to undergo a big transition in the next few decades. And it's a transition that will in particular be something that younger people today will in a sense experience, have the longest experience of, and it is the transition from high carbon to low carbon. And there is a question, I think, for the world, and the most immediate moment at which that question will be posed is in Copenhagen, which is how do we make this transition? And we have two choices, in my view, about the way we can go down this transition. We can make the transition in a planned way, which avoids environmental disaster, and also creates the jobs and the industries of the future in green technology, a path that ensures greater energy security for countries because homegrown energy can be more secure energy, as we know, a path that involves less pollution, more efficient vehicles, more efficient homes, more comfortable homes, in other words, a positive or benign path. And then I think there is a much less benign path, which is we carry on with high carbon growth, we assume the problem will go away, and then we find that we have a big shock. and the shock involves the need to adapt in a much more painful, much more dramatic way, with at the same time as having to cope with huge costs from climate change. Costs of drought, costs of flooding, costs of various environmental disasters. So that, in my view, is the choice that we face, and I think it is very urgent that we get on with choosing the right path. Now, let me try and argue three things. Why do I believe that is the choice, and why do we have to make the choice now? Secondly, what does the choice involve? And thirdly, how do we make this choice? And I want to say something briefly about each of these issues. First of all, the why. And we were having a discussion with the rector earlier on about a lecture I think you had a year ago, which some of you may have been at, from President Klaus, who takes a slightly different view from me on these questions, essentially questioning the science behind climate change. And I admitted to the rector beforehand that I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to come here and say I am a scientist and I can give you the definitive view. But what I am going to say to you is a couple of things. First of all, what all the scientists in Britain tell me, not scientists run by the government, scientists from the Royal Society, from elsewhere, say that as scientists can be sure about anything, they are sure that climate change is happening and it is man-made. What do they say? They say, look, we are heading for temperatures that the world has not seen since humans walked on the Earth, and all of our evidence is that this is linked to carbon emissions. Sure, 1 million years ago, we had temperatures which might have been similar, but it was dinosaurs that ruled the Earth in those days, not human beings. And it's a very different world that we were in. So, of course, there are phases of temperature that the world goes through, but this phase is a particular phase because it is about carbon emissions causing this rise in temperature. Now, I'm not a scientist, and people may want to ask me questions about the science, but here's what I said to the rector on the question of uncertainty. So maybe you think there is uncertainty. Maybe you think President Klaus came along and gave me a very convincing version of events and said it was not true, and then this guy comes along and he says it is true. Maybe 50-50, or maybe one of them is right, one of them is wrong. Here's the thing. I don't think it's a 50-50 chance. But let's say, for the sake of argument, it's a 50-50 chance. I was saying to the rector, look, if you had a 50-50 chance of the aeroplane crashing, you wouldn't get on the aeroplane. And he said to me, well, but you're not talking about the aeroplane now because the decisions we make now will be for 20 years' time. So I said, okay, you're right about this. You wouldn't say, let me book a flight for my children in 20 years' time if there was a 50% chance of the aeroplane crashing. And that's, I think, the point, which is either you believe the scientists who say this is as sure a bet as it can be, or maybe you think there's uncertainty. But the question is whether, on the basis of uncertainty, you want to just assume the problem away. So on the basis of a flip of the coin, you want to say, well, look, we could be consigning our children to the devastation that this guy Miliband comes along and tells us is going to happen. Klaus might be right, and maybe it is all hogwash, made up, wrong, but we're willing to take the risk for our kids. We're willing to say, look, on the flip of a coin, you're going to land up in a Miliband forecast situation, but maybe it'll be all right, and you'll end up in a Klaus situation. So that's my case to you, and you may want to come back on the science, but I think whether you believe the science 100% or not, or whether you think there is uncertainty, it's right to act. But in saying it's right to act, we then have to look at what the consequences of acting and not acting are, and that's what I want to talk about.